Hey everybody, welcome to the Grand Torino with me, your host, Quirton Crooked. I'm delighted to have here for my first guest, Mr. John Waters. We're going to have a quick conversation in a few minutes, but a few quick words, if I could, just to remind you to like the videos, to subscribe if you can. We've also got PayPal, cryptocurrencies set up on the description box, and links will be set up in the description box. If you feel like the videos are worth any monetary value or any sort of subscriptions, will all be greatly received, because these will all be put back into opening up the platform. The platform is designed, or is aspiring to open up a platform for all sorts of conversations and all interviews, and I'm delighted to have John as my very first guest. John, welcome. Thanks very much.
Hi.
John, for some of our viewers that might not be aware of you, can you give us a quick snapshot of you?
Well, I'm a writer. Been writing in Ireland. I was a journalist for many, many years in the Irish Times, which was time it was our probably most credible newspaper. 24 years I was there. I worked in other newspapers, TV, radio, written 10 books, plays, songs. I'm kind of a rock and roller. I started off in music journalism way back with Hot Press, which is Ireland's music paper, keeping Ireland safe for rock and roll was our motto. And so, I've kind of travelled. Now these days I guess it's important to say that what I stand for now, what the things they've changed over the years, and people think that's because you get old, you get conservative.
Exactly.
That isn't this. Well, it's not. I suppose that it would follow that kind of path, but it's actually more that you grow, you live, things happen to you. Mm-hmm. You start looking at the things you believe when you're younger, and you say that doesn't quite fit. That doesn't square. I mean, in fact, I found myself, I won't go into it too much, but, in a lot of my situations in life, particularly in relation to my daughter and legal situations and all that, that actually I began to realise that actually some of the things I believed, which were quite feminist and lefty and all that, they were going to kill me if I didn't get out of them, because they didn't make any sense. And the people that I thought would have been my allies in those kind of situations and battles turned out to be my enemies. And I started looking at all that, and I had other experiences. I was in Czechoslovakia back after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and I kind of was there for the first few elections, and that opened my mind to a lot of my ideas about socialism. So that's kind of, and then there was kind of another experience that I had. I became an alcoholic when I was really in my 30s, and I kind of made a recovery through Alcoholics Anonymous and spiritual path and all that. And that up to that, I'd been agnostic. And I started to look at that, and I wrote a book called Lapsed Agnostic out of that. And I guess what I'm saying is that if you're alert, if you're alive, you're alert. You've got to stay awake and look at what happens. There's no point in continuing to believe the same stuff if it doesn't work for you.
Update your information as it becomes more.
If it's not fitting what's happening in your life, if it doesn't check out against the events of your life, then it's time to look at.
It's time to reevaluate.
Yeah, it is.
So we recently had the IRA exit here just the following weekend, and I know Nigel Farage was the president and he was a great speaker, but I was along there myself, and I was particularly taken by your speech. I thought it was fantastic. When you walked onto the stage and you bowed, could you explain that to some of our...
Yeah, I that's an idea. I've been talking a little bit about that because we've been doing some meetings around the country over the last 3 months about the repeal the eighth thing that's going on, and we're kind of fighting to retain the eighth, and we've been explaining the constitutional position to people. And in the course of that, I started doing this kind of riff, which was about the idea that Ireland is actually a republic. It's not actually a democracy. People think it's more than a democracy.
I get that, yeah.
And that means that the people are sovereign.
Yes.
So I want to get that idea across, and I've been talking about this in a certain way. And as I was going up the steps to the stage, I just for the first time noticed that there was a tricolour behind the lectern. So instead of going to the lectern, I went to the tricolour and I bowed to the people. And some of them were laughing, and some of them were kind of, what's this?
Taken aback with it.
Yeah, what's this guy doing? Is he trying?
Yeah, it's a performance.
Yeah. And I walked to the lectern and I said, I bow to you, not because I can't tell the end from the beginning, but because you're the sovereign people. And it means you're the you govern.
And you got a great reaction from it too.
Oh, phenomenal.
And because not many people realise that as well.
They kind of knew it. They knew when I said it what it meant. It's just straight, because they just cheered.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Because I didn't explain it. I just said it, and they got it immediately. And I went on then to explain about the judge, going on, and when he comes on to the bench, and the tipstaff, whatever it is, he says, "All rise," and people in the court waiting, they kind of bow, and the judge kind of goes nods, and I said, like, that's the wrong way around.
Yeah,
the judge should bow to the people.
Exactly.
He's our servant. But we've lost track of that in Ireland. That's kind of the fundamental point of to me, what's
started bringing that into people's conscience or to their understanding, trying to awaken these stuff from past our old traditions.
Because one of the things I've learned over my years fighting various things is that people, you need reason, you need debate, you need to think, you need to talk, and you need to explain things, but you sure need emotion as well.
We do.
People need to feel something in their gut. We're not just the head, we're the head, the heart, the gut. Everything
in one, yeah.
If you don't have all those three elements working, you're not really getting the information, and you're not really working your intelligence.
From my point of view, when I started thinking about into my situation, the use of critical thinking, I just hadn't even used it, because you just seem to go from day to day where you're just involved in your own personal life, and you can't seem to stick your head above. But when your epistemology or your way of thinking is kind of knocked to the side or kiltered, it gives you a moment of pause to kind of reflect on, this is what I think. Is this correct? Is this the information right?
I think it's something that only just crept up on us. This whole new culture. This mass media, 24/7, wall to wall news, wall to wall this, wall to wall that, information, talk, radio, and because like before that, when I was a kid, like, you didn't really have that. You didn't even have like there was no music on radio much then.
That's
in
right,
Ireland.
Not many people remember that now either.
No, in Ireland, like, we had the top 20 or something, and maybe once a week for an hour, and then
you had to answer the phone to find out who it was that was on the other end of it.
Yeah, you get music in hospitals requests, a request show, but you get half the record.
Yeah, that's right.
And then but there was very little discussion about things on the radio the way there is now. Now everybody's pummeled all day long with kind of people giving their views and their opinion, and people, because they don't feel as expert as these people, kind of latch on to certain things they say, and that becomes theirs.
Yeah.
And they can regurgitate it.
They take the headline snap and they go, right, that fits, that seems to appropriate with what everybody else is thinking, so we'll just go along with that. And that becomes that's the easier thing to do.
And that's where all this kind of insistence on orthodoxy comes from, because if you're anywhere out of that, if you're thinking for yourself.
Exactly.
But I say to people, if everybody's thinking the same, the chances are nobody's thinking at all. And that's really true. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we've got to now in our culture, in our society globally, certainly in the West anyway, and certainly in Ireland. For sure in Ireland we're in big trouble.
I think so, yeah.
With regard to the right to speak your mind, the kind of even in small groups, you can see the culture has, just claws of the culture have reached in and actually rearranged things so that if you say things that are not approved, even in a small intimate group, people go,
we can't say that. Be mindful of that.
Yeah, and that's deadly. And the reason it's deadly, people don't get this really. It's deadly. It's not just deadly because I have a right to speak. Because it doesn't matter in a certain sense if I sound off about something. That's not the point. The point is, without the conversation, nothing gets checked out. Mm-hmm. Nothing gets examined. It's like in a court of law. The reason you have two sides in a court of law is so that you can try the question of guilt or innocence. Mm-hmm. And the same applies to every single thing in the world. You've got to have those two forces in conflict in order for some kind
to reach a compromise or to reach some sort of settlement.
Or even that the person watching this drama of conversation is able to say, well, I don't agree with either of those guys, but actually what I now think is they're missing something.
I've altered my position a little bit, having viewed that conversation.
And I find the most frightening thing about this is that it is journalists, most of all, who are actually enforcing this new tyranny of silence and of political correctness. Mm-hmm. And political correctness, by the way, I mean, people kind of smile when they hear the term. It's sure, it's political correctness gone mad, or you're going to say it's political correctness gone mad. I know it. That political correctness is not some kind of cookie kind of over obsession with politeness to certain minorities or groups. It's actually a tyranny of censorship, which prevents you not just saying things, but even thinking the things. I mean, on Saturday night, after I had done my speech, I came home, and one of the first emails I opened when I looked at my mail was from a journalist who was kind of a friend of mine, And she was kind of like, it's just kind of, did you say something about immigrants? And I thought, okay, so I went back, well what have you heard? Have you seen my speech? No, just on Twitter, they're going on Twitter. She said, oh, it was Twitter. So the people on Twitter who haven't been there, who don't know what I said, who don't like me, who don't want to like me, who are absolutely adamant that everything I say will twist it into something else, that's what you're asking me about. Yeah. Then she wanted my speech. I said my speech doesn't exist in written form. I have a script, but I bust off that. It's not. I can't give it out to anybody because it's not what I said. What I said will be soon up online, and you can
verify it there. Then
went back and forth. This thing about focusing on this kind of immigrant. And I did talk about immigration, but I make a distinction between a number of things, several distinctions actually, when I talk about immigration, because it's such an explosive subject because of all this political correctness. One of the first distinctions I make, there's a radical difference between expressing some kind of antipathy to one person or a group of people and having a view that something needs to be done philosophically or politically with regard to, for example, the problem of immigration. So I might take the view that Ireland, which I do, that there's a limit to what we can take, to the number of people we can take, and when we reach that, we're going to have to stop, and that's not going to be racist.
Yeah.
That's not to say that if I see any number of people in the street who are from different countries, I'm going to feel any way antagonistic towards them, because they're here.
Exactly.
And they're welcome here. You know, I'm not going to look askance at anybody because they happen to be in my country and they've been allowed in and they're free to be here. They're welcome. Absolutely. But I asked the question, like, how, you know, do we have the right to discuss the shape of our country into the future? That's the question. It's not about the individual people or these groups of people or these specific people. It's got to do with what kind of country and what kind of home we have. Because when we lose our home, we don't have anywhere else to go to.
Indeed.
Like, they're here from their home. Their home still exists.
Yeah.
Ours won't exist if we allow them to change it.
Protect it or stand up for it or...
Yeah. And I think so, you see, this is the kind of stuff, immediately these assholes online, you know, oh, racism, xenophobia.
It's to shut the conversation down, slander.
Yeah. We need to say, get lost.
No, not
get lost. You know, this is important. It's vital. Because there's a secondary point that the very important distinction to you made, you know, and I said this in my speech on Saturday, not that this person bothered to, to
listen to it.
Yeah, well, she did eventually, and you know, then decided that I had said exactly what she thought I was going to say anyway. Yeah, you know, so, surprise. Yeah. But in fact, and when then I pointed out that there was a section in my speech which actually said the following, that actually not alone should we allow immigration, but actually immigration can be really good for society.
Beneficial.
Yeah, that's how our cultures grow. I'm not a idea of purist culturally. You can't have a pure culture. It dies if you don't cross-fertilize it. And I said this kind of stuff. She described that as, oh yeah, very clever. So like I was clever.
Trying to work around it.
Dressing up my racism.
Yeah, dressing up your racism, yeah.
Yeah. So that's the kind of thing you get, you know. But my point is this, that actually that is absolutely true. But there's a danger, and I quoted from Douglas Murray's new book, The Strange Death of Europe, and he makes this really, really important point, that yes, that's true, it's good for cultures to have people come in. But when you have a huge influx, at the same time as the culture is itself self-destructing, when it's actually just deconstructing itself for cultural reasons, as we are in Europe, we're destroying the Christian roots of our culture. We're destroying our Christian heritage. We're the ones questioning it. We're the ones throwing it out. And these people come in here. And they're not doing that to their culture. Oh. They're bringing their culture with them intact. Exactly. So essentially, we're de-Europeizing Europe. And that's something we should be talking about as well.
Absolutely.
No more than that.
Jordan Peterson talks along the same sort of lines. I myself came away, I'm a lapsed Catholic. I would consider myself a lapsed Catholic, but not that I've returned to faith, but I appreciate, as Jordan Peterson would have said, faith has its place because it binds communities, or it gathers people around it as well. Whereas atheism can have a sense of nihilism about it, and we can fracture and go off if we're not bound.
Well, I have various thoughts on that, and I've written a couple of books about that. Lapsed Agnostic was one of them, and the other one was Beyond Consolation. I have another one written, sort of the third in the trilogy of that, which is called Men Without Chests, which I hope will come out in the next year or so. I don't know. It's hard to get books published now when you're doing this kind of stuff because the culture is so hostile. But I have a publisher, and it's just a matter of getting it on the production line.
Exactly.
But I've written about this, the importance of faith and religion. I mean, I go further than Peterson. I mean, and you can actually, in lots of ways, compartmentalize aspects of this. And I hear what Peterson says, and everything he says is absolutely true. I love the way that he talks about the mythology of religion and the metaphorical aspects, and deals with all that, and the stories.
Symbolism, the tradition.
Yeah, all that. And he takes out of the Gospels amazing things. And it's never clear whether what his position is, really.
Exactly.
And that's fine. I don't have an issue with that, because actually none of us know. It's a mystery. But my position is that the human person needs to have some part. If you think of the human person, this is a very bad image, but if you think of it as a kind of an equation in which they deal with reality, and there's kind of brackets and pluses and minuses and equals and more brackets and all, there needs to be a set of brackets in there with something that deals with the mystery, so that the person, and that being the person, that equation being the person. Because if you don't have something that at some level allows you to think about the mystery, you're missing the greater part of reality. So, and that's what religion, that's one of the things religion does. It gives people a kind of a mythology and a story, a narrative, in which they can inhabit those brackets with real ideas that allow them then to function better.
Yeah.
And that goes to all kinds of things. It's not just morality. People talk about reduce things down, religion down to morality, but it's also hope, optimism, walking forward on the path of your life.
Yeah.
What Peterson himself talking about, dealing the logos, dealing with dealing with the chaos in front of you. Like, these are religious ideas. This is where they come from. The idea, for example, and I think possibly the most important religious idea of all is one I learned in AA. Because I went in as an agnostic to AA, if not an atheist. And they have, the higher power, God. And I couldn't get my head around this. I didn't want to hear about it. But then somebody says to me, well, actually, it's not that important at this stage that you get the God thing. But there's one thing you absolutely do have to get. And that is that you're not God.
Yeah.
Because you think you are.
Yeah.
And that's part of your problem. In fact, it's your whole problem. You think you're God. And that was so right. And in fact, that is actually a fundamental understanding of addiction. And addiction being a symptom of modernity. That actually, having kicked God off the throne, metaphorically, mythologically, in all the other ways, we then take his place. And here's a problem. We take his place, and then therefore we acquire all the responsibilities of God in our own lives. Got to run my whole life now. I'm in charge. I made myself. I decide everything about myself. Yeah. I am myself. I make myself. And the problem is I have all the responsibilities but none of the power.
Yeah.
And that results in fear, terror, sheer terror. And the only cure for terror, for me, was alcohol.
So, John, on the meeting on Saturday, let's get down to the meat and bones with repeal the 8 and save the 8. Your position is save the 8.
Oh yeah. I'm not pro. I don't call myself pro-life, not because I'm not, but because I don't like the term. Really, I just think a lot of these terms, language kind of dies, and pro-life, words acquire some of the kind of the residue of all the antagonism and prejudice that's thrown at them. So, like for example, the word conservative, that's really happened to it, and right wing, that's happened for sure. It's unusable. I would never call myself right wing.
Exactly. I'm in the same position as well.
And I think sadly the pro-life idea that has happened to it. It's kind of like it's a kind of a conversation stopper. People go, Now, so I say I'm pro-baby.
Yeah.
And
that's a good position.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting word because it's like you think it's probably. If you see it on a T-shirt or something, it looks like probably without a hyphen. And people say, "What's it?" Oh,
try and read it.
Yeah, and then they've zoned in and think, okay, pro-baby, got that. So I don't know. You see, this debate, so-called, shouldn't be a debate. There can be no debate about whether a human being can be killed legally when they're completely innocent of anything, when you don't have capital punishment in your constitution or in your laws, of which we don't, when they're defenseless, and when they have no voice. You know, and there's no debate. What are we debating about? Why are we trying to figure out something here?
Yeah.
There's nothing to figure out. It's very simple. There's no problem of human beings that can be solved by slaughtering an innocent, defenseless human being. There just isn't. It doesn't matter what the problem on the other side is. I don't care. You call it whatever you like. There are solutions.
Of course, yeah.
Whether it's like money, compensation, counselling, protection, all kinds of things we can offer people who are in trouble. We all get into trouble in our lives. We suffer impositions. We suffer ill health. We suffer all kinds of stuff. Like I've got ill health at the moment. I've got cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I've got to have an operation tomorrow morning.
Wow.
Going at 7:00. That's cool. It's not fatal. Some people would be very sorry to hear.
Yeah, I heard that very much.
Sorry.
It wouldn't be in human nature at all. I wouldn't believe that at all.
So life is like that,
Yeah, of course.
So the idea that there's a kind of an idea here somewhere at the heart of this whole discussion that women are entitled to have all impositions lifted from them. That the society has a duty to lift all impositions from them, even the ones that they're kind of responsible for. And I don't buy that. I think we need to stop that kind of victim thinking big time and back off it. But actually there's something more vital for me in this whole thing. And I was thinking about it there last night, and it just occurred to me, we don't have capital punishment in Ireland. But if you were to think about this, imagine that I had to go to a court tonight. I had to go once in relation to a certain matter to a judge's house at like 10 o'clock at night and have a court hearing, and it was so funny. Like, the judge didn't have a Bible, so he had to sit next door for a Bible, right? So I'm here in the house, and I'm thinking, supposing I had to go to that house, that judge or another judge, and plead for just, not all unborn children, but just one child. And here I am arriving in the house, and this is the case I would be making. Because it's a terrifying thing. If I don't do this in this house, and I walk out that door and it's over, and the judgment is the black cap.
I get you.
I've lost. I've failed, and this is really serious. For me, this is really serious. Because why? Because this child is, for me, a human person. That means like you.
Yeah.
I could be doing it for you. I'm just, in this case, doing it for this little thing.
For the small child, yeah.
Yes, but for you, it's the same thing for me.
Yeah.
And that's the position the law has taken as well in Ireland. That is the law in Ireland. There isn't a single judgment in the entire history of Irish jurisprudence which says otherwise, which says that the unborn child is not a full human person. So it is as if I was pleading for you.
Right.
So here I am at this guy's dining table, and I'm putting this out. So I say, look, there's no evidence whatsoever that this is not a full human person. 6 foot tall, 170 pounds, and fully healthy and completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Totally vulnerable, totally defenseless, and has no voice. That's my case. Now, Judge, what are you going to say to me to explain to me why you have even the slightest hesitation before just laughing at me and saying, please go away, of course this is a ridiculous conversation. Just, of course this person has to live.
Yeah.
Of course there's no reason. Who? Me, a judge? I would do... No, please. No. Here.
It's huge responsibility for one person to bear, or
just
make that decision.
It's money. It's unconscionable to think that we would actually contemplate such a thing. And yet here we are, having debates about it, discussions about it. A little bit.
Are we truly having the conversation though, and
no.
the way things are in this country, or is it just is it a viewpoint?
It's a kind of a conversation that happens in a trance, which has been created by propaganda. It's a kind of a hypnosis. It's because we have this already. We in Ireland, people talk about the 8th Amendment. That's a new thing in Ireland. We never did that before. We never talk about amendments in terms of the number of their sequence.
And talk about that. We talk about the constitutional changes that will take place. What are the ramifications for yay and a nay, as you understand them?
Well, the article in question is Article 40.3.3, and that says the state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn, and with due regard to the rights of the mother, pledges to defend and vindicate that right. That's essentially it. Go back to the beginning. The state acknowledges. It doesn't say the state extends to the child the right to life. Because
that's an important difference, all right. Yeah.
That would be a nonsense.
Yeah.
It doesn't. The Irish Constitution is based on, it starts in the name of the Most Holy Trinity. It is based on natural law. That idea of the Most Holy Trinity it can be both a religious and a secular idea. It is based on that idea of we are not God.
As you were saying before.
We can't dispense the most fundamental rights among ourselves, because that would lead to injustice, fundamentally. Because once you abolish God and all the ideas of God and the idea of a transcendent source of everything, then what actually happens is not that all men become God in a democratic utopia. What actually happens is that a few men become God,
right, and
they rule over the rest. And when you therefore allow this kind of understanding to fall, you leave open the road to Auschwitz.
I can see that, yeah.
And that's essentially what this is fundamentally about for me. You see,
yeah.
I don't come to this as a Catholic. I am a Catholic, but the way I put it is this, that Catholicism is fundamentally about reason. And I reason myself. So Catholicism helps me in some regards. But in a certain other sense, we're actually parallel entities. We reason our way. Catholicism reasoned its way through history, coming to certain conclusions. I reasoned my way through my life. Unsurprisingly, we have come more or less to the same conclusion in lots of instances. Some we haven't.
Yeah.
But I've always said this, that in the situations that we haven't, my past experience tells me that one day I'll actually get it.
Yeah.
I'll understand why I missed it, why I didn't get it. And that's been my experience of Catholicism. So I don't come to this because of a diktat or a doctrine. I come to it because I think...
Critical thinking, you've rationed, you've reasoned.
Yeah. This is about using the use of reason, which is...
Do you think that's common in especially in academia now, or not even in academia, but in young people's, we call them millennials?
No, because the sources of young people's information to education and media of all kinds are both contaminated with ideology, and this is what I mean about like their whole notion of idealism and of virtue is perverted by the idea of what they're directed towards. The goods or the supposed goods they're being directed at are completely bogus in a lot of instances. And the culture is actually perverted. It's cultural Marxism.
Yes.
I mean, this is it's a well-known kind of.
Can you explain cultural Marxism as well? I know we're all
okay. Well, for me,
your understanding.
Yeah, for me, cultural Marxism is it emerged out of the Frankfurt School, the work of the Frankfurt School, which started in Germany in the 1930s, moved to before the 30s. At the time of the World War II, they moved to New York to Columbia University, and it was based on the ideas of Gramsci and Antonio Gramsci, and fundamentally it was a reinvention of Marxism for a new world, on the basis that it was kind of intuited that Marxism of an economic kind had pretty much failed.
Communism being an economic theory, so
yeah.
rather than the haves and the have-nots, it's now gone to the oppressed and the oppressor.
Yeah, and that in communism of the economic kind there was the idea of the proletariat, which was supposed to step into its historically allocated role of to the sovereign of history, as it were, and as a result of the Russian Revolution and the aftermath, it became fairly clear that this wasn't going to work. Why? Because the proletariat didn't want this role; they wanted better lives.
Egalitarianism, wasn't that not in the Republic?
Yeah, and they wanted better jobs, better houses, more income, so on, the way most people do. So, Marxism was really looking around for another
somewhere
candidate.
to go or something, some other tenant to kind of hang its hat on.
That's what the Frankfurt School did. They developed this idea of the victim in society.
How do you think it's come here to us? I mean, we were never really cultural Marx. How has it come here to Ireland?
Well, like the victim group became the proletariat. They were like women, gays, blacks, all these other, what we now regard as the victim groups, or the ones we can't speak about in any way at all because of political correctness. And that political correctness is a part of cultural Marxism. So this spread, it's interesting. I mean, these ideas spread mainly to academia, but also that was the formalization of it. But culturally, it spread through the 1960s revolutions, and through rock and roll, and through movies and popular culture and so on, and and I was part of all that. So I was in that hypnosis for a long time. Not thinking about it, because it was, particularly in Ireland at the time, and probably about maybe 70s, 80s, there was a sense that you were kind of part of a movement which was colourful against a very kind of grey,
a counterculture feel to it as well.
Very grey and state. So it was hard to see around that, and it was only when I had certain experiences, like I said before, to do with my child being an unmarried father and seeing that you had actually no standing, no rights whatsoever, and the people that I thought would be on my side didn't want to talk to me at all about that. And that was interesting, and then going to Czechoslovakia and seeing socialism, actually existing socialism, and the aftermath. And I remember there was one kind of conversation I had. This guy that I met there, Ivan was his name, Ivan Shrek, and he had an apartment very close to Narodny Street, which is where the revolution happened in 1989. And there was a rumour, it was actually a false rumour, it was a long story, but it was that a student had been killed when the police battling charged a march. And this guy was actually he was a plant. He pretended to be dead. He was a KGB plant, because they had a plan to kind of bring down the communist government in Prague and replace it with a soft line, another communist regime. But this guy he just lay down, and the rumour was around Prague that a student had been killed, and a million people came onto the streets that night.
Straight away.
And they started, on the spot, they built an altar, and everybody passing brought candles, and so in a few days, like the candle wax was just like flooding onto the street. And my friend Ivan, he got the job of cleaning up the candle wax, and he had boxes of it. He used to bring it back to his family. And then he said, "What will I do?" So he got busts of the communist leaders, Stalin and Gottwald, the American guy, and Lenin and all. And he started to make. He made molds, and he made candle wax figures of these people, the heads. And he started making some money out of this, and he thought he was a very ironic kind of a character. He thought it was great fun to be making money out of these dictators. But I used to have all these arguments about him, because I was still a kind of a lefty, and I was saying, but I was saying socialism meant that bad, you guys, you
haven't done it right.
Exactly.
Next time it gets done,
it's well intentioned,
It does come from it, you think.
It's been nice to people, and he was saying, no. So we didn't get really anywhere with this. I was there for several weeks, and I used to see him pretty much every day, and we'd have this argument would go on. Really, really good humour, but nevertheless, quite intense. And the day I was leaving, he came up with me in the taxi to the airport, and he had a cardboard box on his knees. And I said, "What's in the box, Ivan?" And he says, "Oh, you will soon discover." So I said, "Okay." So we got to the airport, and I was just about to go in through the gates, and he gave me the box, and he opened the top of the box, and it was all these heads, Stalin and Lenin, and he says, "You must bring to Ireland the heads of the socialist murderers."
Oh, wow. Straight, that was a huge, very good.
I thought, wow. What it was, you get it.
Yeah,
you can get. It's like, whoa.
Yeah, it kind of rocks you.
Yeah.
Wake up and have a look at this.
And I started waking up then.
Yeah.
And I started reading up about it and looking into it, and Solzhenitsyn and all this stuff. And I thought, oh, we are so stupid.
And reading, we read you could push on the Gulag Archipelago kind of books and stuff like that. To get kind of a background. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not easily digestible if you're not a constant reader and stuff like that. But we've got such a fantastic avenue now to gain information, especially online on the YouTube.
Yeah.
And we've got more and more, as I say, Jordan Peterson type people coming out to espouse, to counter narrative, the narrative that's been, positioned on mainstream.
It's absolutely amazing. I mean, I when I was a journalist, I started rather blindly and back in the Irish Times, and when my daughter was born. In fact, before that, I'd written a play called Long Black Coat, which was staged in 1994. My daughter was born in 96, so this was actually before, and was actually about fatherhood.
Yeah.
And about what I immediately I understood, from people talking to people around me and seeing stuff, and just an intuition that there was something like a crisis of fatherhood, and the play is really a dialogue between two men, an old man and a young man, father and son, and there's a third male, the grandson, the son, who's missing.
That's right, I know that part.
And the point is like that. It's like they're having an argument about whose fault it is that the grandson is missing, that the young boy is missing. And the young guy blames the old guy for being a patriarch and oppressive and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. The old guy blames the young guy for essentially being a wimp, for giving everything away. And that's kind of, the play then develops in certain ways. And I wrote that, and like it was like a prophecy for me, because within 2 years I had my child in very similar situation. But it was a girl. And it was high profile and all that. And it was terrible. Beautiful in lots of ways, but terrible in other ways. Yeah. And actually, after due course, I started to write in the Irish Times tentatively about this experience and what I was discovering. And I kind of, started.
What feedback were you getting off that, or?
Oh, very negative.
Yeah.
People in the Irish Times tried to close me down, and there was delegations.
Would that have been in the upper the editors, the chiefs, or
there were delegations of feminists to the editor's office every day demanding my head in a plate, and he wasn't particularly reluctant, but he couldn't have done it. I managed to stay there.
Stay there, of course.
Yeah, and I started to write about it in different ways and trying to figure it out, and then I started moving into other areas that were to do with men and looking at like male suicide.
Yeah, statistics are there to speak for themselves as well. Domestic
violence, which on a worldwide basis, they research.
It's a two-way street. Happens to both sides.
Totally, and all this men's health that it was being ignored. That certain cancers that men suffer from, like were.
To be fair, now there is a movement along women and feminists of another thing started to purport men's health, men's issues and stuff like that. And speaking out
some brands of feminists. We see feminism. You see, people then said I was anti-women and anti-feminist, and in a way I was kind of anti-feminist in a way, because what I saw mostly of feminism was pretty doctrinaire, man-hating stuff. But actually, that's not the case of feminism in the round. I mean, the early feminists were not like that. The suffragettes were not like that. Not at all. They wanted a holistic realignment of the relationships between men and women, so as to free women into the public sphere and to free men into the intimate sphere, which is to balance exactly what I was looking for. But I noticed that the kind of feminists I was encountering, they wanted women liberated into the public sphere, but they didn't want men liberated anywhere.
Liberated anywhere, yeah.
They want
a complete reversal of what
they wanted men down there.
Yeah.
That's what they want. Yeah. So I said, oh no, I can't have that. So but it's amazing, there's loads of guys now coming out that like Peterson's been doing it for years, and I'm only just aware of that. I mean, that he's been doing this for 30 years.
A bit of catching up to do.
Yeah, and studying it and all, and his preoccupations are not always mine, but we kind of have.
Well, you can align.
Oh,
you can see there's a lot. Well, there's reason behind his, or there's astute understanding. Of all
I was doing my stuff in a kind of an experimental way because I didn't know what I was encountering, because it didn't make any sense.
Sorry to cut across that, but as Jordan would say, you're formulating your idea. Your first thing should not be considered your final argument.
No.
Your first espousal should be hypothesizing, and you're looking for either the reaction or you're looking for feedback to come to an agreement.
And that's the thing we're not allowed to do anymore.
Exactly.
Because that's the nature of journalism. Mm-hmm. I mean, journalism is not like a legal document. An article is not like an affidavit, which everything has to be completely, 100% factual, truthful. You can't say anything that you don't know yourself. You can't say anything that you don't know to be true, that you haven't evidence for, objective,
It can be opinion-based as well.
Yeah, and also you're actually trying things out. Is this why it is? Mm-hmm. You mightn't say it like this, but you're saying, here's... And you say, you finished the article, and you say, that actually makes sense. But then, the next day, somebody comes up to you and say, I read your article, but you're missing something. Mm. And I say, what? And they tell you, I'll write another article now, I'll incorporate that.
So your opinion changes as more information, and then if you agree with it or you discount it.
That's the thing I have about the online thing. There's no allowance for that on in the kind of Twitter, the social media, and that kind of the posts on the end of articles.
Yeah.
There's a mentality in those sectors that kind of says, okay, you're on trial, and there's this half sentence here and this half sentence here, which expose you as an ism or an obia or
one of the buzzwords. But that's essentially just to say, and that's essentially where Gran Torino, this platform here, is designed to do. It's just to open up the conversation and to allow all viewpoints.
Yeah, it's a frightening thing, because if we don't do this, we're in really big trouble.
Exactly.
We're in really big trouble, because you can't have a civilization that doesn't have conversation at its heart. Because I often say this when I speak about these things in public, that in me or you, in the individual, to be able to converse like this requires a lot of thinking beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
At some point over the last.
You have to come with your levels of understanding, and you're trying to engage with each other now.
To get to the point I'm able to say some of the things I say and have an understanding of them. I've lived 62 years, and that's all those years.
You're looking great on it.
Thanks. Talk to me tomorrow. So, you're everything that's happened, you process it, and you try to come up with an ongoing, a rolling understanding of it. But for a society, it's the other way around. The conversation comes first.
Yes.
Because otherwise, the society can't think.
The opening gambit.
Yeah. So because societies do think,
yeah,
but they think after speaking together.
That's right.
And that's the really scary thing about what's happening now, that they're closing that down. And that's a deliberate strategy. That's culture Marxism, to exclude everything.
Suppressing any opposition or any other theory other that goes along with the critical, what do they say, as we would say, socialism would speak through just the defined parameters, through the rectangular box, and all other relevant facts are thrown asunder.
Plus, through the collaboration of the media, and I think now, particularly with the advent of social media, which is a kind of, I think, more of an adjunct, strangely, of mainstream media than it is an online phenomenon of itself. It is an online phenomenon, but it seems to kind of coalesce with the demands of a dying mainstream more than anything.
I think it's going to take its place, and eventually it's given us that chance to move around, because we can all connect and discuss amongst ourselves now. Yeah,
it's turning social media, Twitter particularly, is turning the mainstream media into its own likeness. Yeah, where everything is knee jerk.
Well, it's trying to. I would say just as the argument to inform you new sort of facts. The proposition now is to get rid of net neutrality, or to tarnish net neutrality, and instead of its play, come up with an internet bill of rights, somewhere along the lines of the Constitution or whatever like that, because the internet does exist mostly in America. Most of the platforms, most of it's all generated from there. And with the demise of the Obama administration and now the Trump administration coming in, AT&T have been selected now to take over most of the communications in the States, and they're actually the ones that are coming up with the internet Bill of Rights, which I think will facilitate more conversations.
Well, that's good.
And I think Twitter will eventually learn, because it's still in its initial infantile stage, and it was controlled by a certain ideology, or it's been proven now with Project Veritas on shadow banning and all the little tactics, especially on YouTube, with demonetizing platforms, that they were targeted specifically for their rhetoric. So the demonetization was to try and slow them down. But with the Internet Bill of Rights, we should be able to gain a level playing field. If and when that does transpire, and I do believe that Trump.
I think it's important to not for the sake of regulation, because ultimately it's about creating the correct cultural conditions where there is a degree of civility and openness and so on. But the attrition of social media and the changed mainstream media has now created conditions which are really inimical to real discussion on anything contentious. And also they're I think together and working with other forces, propaganda of various kinds and so on, and they are propaganda anyway, are creating this kind of like almost trance zone, or kind of like a hypnosis that happens. I mean, we see this now with the 8th Amendment. We saw it before with our so-called marriage equality referendum in 2015, where you have basically people are like, they don't really know much about the issue. Yeah. They don't know what the Constitution is. They don't know what article in the Constitution is at stake. They don't know any of the wordings. They don't know any of the content. They don't know anything. Yeah. But what actually happens is that they're actually almost in a hypnotic trance, And then you can see this with the repeal the eighth. I mean, like as I say, we didn't talk about articles of the Constitution in terms of their sequence number. This is the first time I've ever heard this. But you would talk about, the Americans do it all the time. We don't do it. We would talk about the number of the article in this case, Article 40.3.3. But what happened was like this slogan, repeal the eighth, which then became repeal. Mm-hmm. And now that's kind of like, I would say, a Pavlovian trigger word.
It's just a buzzword now.
Yeah, which is like almost like a hypnotist will actually. I could, if I was a hypnotist, I could have you searching for leprechauns under the table.
It's persuasion tactics.
Yeah.
It's just to install the information. It's a persuasion.
Yeah, and it sends people into rages.
Yeah.
Like they become hysterical by just the use of the word, or the idea that you're actually not in favour of repeal is enough for them to actually hate you before you open your mouth. This is terrifying. If anybody values what democracy is and what freedom is, this is terrifying that you can actually train young people to become attack dogs for an ideology that they know absolutely nothing about in terms of its roots, its long-term agenda.
You're coming out of academia with your informed opinion or whatever professor that you had and is informing your opinion, but you don't have the life experience to see it work in reality or replace it.
No, you don't. But also a lot of the stuff you're getting is these guys, again, cultural Marxism work through universities, and I certainly know that in journalism schools, journalism courses, it's all about this.
Yeah.
Basically, young journalists are being trained as advocates for these ideologies.
Yeah.
They're not actually trained in how to find out the truth. And so the result is that something changed in the last. That's why I stopped being a journalist here in Ireland there 3 years ago. Something changed in the last previous 10 years.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, when I would go on a TV or radio program to talk about a particular subject, the purpose of the exercise was to elicit my position.
Yes.
Put it to test.
Yes.
Disagree with it maybe, but end up having an interesting conversation that helps people to understand. That kind of wore out. Now we have it entirely different now. The purpose now, and I don't do it anymore because I said no. What it is this: you're being put on trial, and you're being put on trial for some form of an orthodoxy or thought crime. Yeah. Whether it's that you had a half thought that sounded like it might be questioning immigration, maybe at some level, or even the total, openness of borders at some level, or whatever, or whether it's actually okay to do gay marriage in the Constitution as opposed to just doing it as a statutory instrument. Like you can make a law. We could have made a law for gay marriage, and I would have no issue with that whatsoever. Yeah. But they insisted on putting it into the Constitution in the article which governs the conventional and normative marriage, which is the family.
And as we see these insertions into the Constitution, what do you perceive or what do you understand from your thing, and what kind of effects will they have if we start tinkering around with the Constitution?
Well, the first thing you need to realise is that they're never about the thing they appear to be about. Yeah. So it's never about abortion per se, it's never about gay marriage per se. These are simply battering rams used.
And to use, sorry to cut across you, Don, and to use the abortion issue, what do you think is the thing that people aren't seeing in the immediate?
Oh, in Ireland, it's undoubtedly to do with making Ireland a kind of a hub for new reproductive technologies, so that all the kind of safeguards in relation to embryos, etc., will be gone.
Would you say that there's like third-party organisations just waiting to move in and set up a new cottage industry?
This is big money.
Big money.
Yeah, big money. And
but I don't think the conversation is being had or people are aware.
This is the point. You're not permitted to say anything. Because if I say that, that's scaremongering. They have cliches for everything. And then you actually say, if somebody says to you on TV, that's scaremongering, and you meet 15 people the next day and say, that's scaremongering. And they think they're thinking.
Yeah. They're following the party line.
Yeah, and I say, even if I'm wrong, at least my opinion is interesting. I've thought about it. Mm-hmm. You might prove me wrong in the long run. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But you haven't any opinion.
Yeah.
So you just want nothing. You want silence, but not the kind of silence that would give us peace.
No. It's
a kind of a negative silence which will actually destroy our heads because we don't actually have the capacity to think straight anymore. And so, like, I think that I've been involved. This is my third referendum campaign now. This Eighth Amendment, Article 40.3.3. I was involved in what was called the Children Amendment in 2012, which was allegedly to give rights to children. It was actually a burglary of the rights of parents.
Yeah. I agree with that too.
Transferred rights of parents to the state.
Get the state more power than the family unit.
So as to allow social workers to just go in families and decide, lay down the law.
Give power to the state over the family unit.
Yeah. And then the gay marriage thing, in so-called in 2015, but this was unbelievable because I was invited to Italy the following year because of our experience. I'll come back to the experience in a minute.
Sure.
But I was invited. I spoke in the Italian Parliament in Rome in the Camera dei Deputati, because they were really kind of worried about the fact that their government was about to introduce gay marriage. They told me, and they wanted me. And then when I looked at what they were proposing, it was actually pretty much indistinguishable from what we'd produced in 2010 as civil unions.
Yeah.
Except they weren't allowing any forms of adoption.
Right.
And we were like so far gone down the highway from there. We had actually made gay couples the equal of heterosexual couples, married couples.
Married couples, yeah.
Which meant actually that if you think of the highest standard of marriage was up there, right? That would marriage equality would suggest that gays went right up there. But they actually didn't. What actually happened was gays went to about there and the others came down to there as well.
It was redaction or reduction.
Yeah, reduction of their rights, because there's no longer any legal recognition, constitutional recognition for biological connection,
right?
Biological relationships, complementary relationship between male and female,
right?
Procreation per se as a natural procreation, natural parenthood doesn't have rights for itself.
Yes.
Parenthood is now something to do that the state ordains. Like this is all this stuff. So the purpose of the whole thing was not actually to bring in gay marriage. It was to create the conditions where you basically destroy the protections that existed there already. And this is a part of a plan. I'm not sure about all of it. I can only speculate as to what the long term.
By design, you think? I mean, if these infringements are coming upon not our sovereignty, but our constitution as such, that they must be. It must be coming from somewhere else. That over the long term plan.
Oh yeah, well, like what we have seen in all these referendums is a huge amount of foreign money being pumped in illegally. Like they find ways around it. Like they just pump it into these organisations who they know they get in.
We've seen Conor McGorman and Ireland into an amnesty taking donations from an NGO from an outside source. I mean that's hasn't been spoken about since either, really.
No, well, I mean Amnesty is such a corrupted organisation now that it's not real. I mean, like I knew one of the founders of Amnesty, Sean McBride. He was an Irishman, great Irishman, and he would be appalled to see what Amnesty has become. It's basically, Amnesty promoting abortion.
I mean, it's
unthinkable.
It's unthinkable.
And this is the thing. Yeah, this is the thing I find interesting. As I said, I was a rock and roller. And I still am. And obviously, that doesn't tally, because rock and roll in Irish culture or in UK culture or indeed now in American culture is secular leftist. And so all the rock stars pretty much they wear the choice T-shirts and way to choose. And I say, okay, but the rock and roll that I know started with the blues. We started with the cries of the slaves.
They had a chronology. It came from somewhere.
But and rock and rollers stood by that.
Yeah. They
stood with the slave. They stood with the most defenseless, with the most innocent, and they stood with them until the danger was past.
Yes.
And now where are they standing? They're standing across the street calling for the deaths, for the slaughter of innocents. They're calling for the genocide of our time. That's what rock and roll's reduced to. And they can't see it. And I know I can't. And look, I totally understand this because there's a part of me that's kind of totally appalled by being where I am, that I have to do this and I've had to do this in several referendums out there because nobody else is doing it, because my reason will not allow me to opt out of it.
Yes,
it's like what Jordan Peterson says. You can't cop out. There's an amazing section in one of his videos that I saw, really blew me away, where he's talking about his daughter being ill and she's got rheumatoid or arthritis, and he's telling her how to give himself an injection, and he describes how he said to her, "Look, kid, you're in real trouble. You've got a real problem. Physically, you're in bits."
Yeah.
But he says there's one way that you can be worse. He says that's if you use your illness as a way to cop out of your responsibilities.
Perfect. Yeah.
Because then that condition, then it's your soul will become sick, and that's much worse.
That's much, much worse.
Whew. I thought,
Powerful, wasn't it?
That's it.
Powerful.
And that's, you see, so I don't have any choice but to be on the
You feel
side.
a compulsion or a compelling. You can't reason in your mind
I'm
not to stand by idly.
I'm pro-baby because I have to be. Because
And for those that would accuse you, are you doing this for any sort of political ambitions or anything like that?
No. Please, I people frequently ask me to become a politician, to run for things. And I can't say that I'll never actually be drummed into it, because there's maybe a situation one day
who knows what the future
you
holds,
don't have a choice because nobody else will do it or whatever. I can't say never say never, but and I'm not playing a game doing that. You know, there's a kind of, you know, they people may not remember that there was this political comedy one time. Yes, Minister.
Of course, yeah.
Jim Hacker was the minister,
Yeah.
and Sir Humphrey was his civil servant, and just of all these and you know, whenever there would be a question of him running for the Prime Minister's job, or just, well, you know, the people have been calling me every minute of every day, demanding that I run, you know, and I say I hope I never kind of, you know, I would really run away from power.
Yeah.
From any, I can't imagine anything worse at the moment than being in Dáil Éireann, being a TD, public representative.
Yeah.
I think it would be the most soul-destroying thing. It would take a hell of a revolution to get me out there.
Yeah.
But,
Thank you very much for that.
But I hope that the revolution comes, and I hope I can help it to come.
We will. We're all part of the facilitation. I'm not going to keep up too much more of your time, but do you think you've covered everything more or less there? Anything else you'd like to add?
I think pretty much. You know, I think just to kind of reinforce that point, you know, that
Sure.
I think that it's weird that you start off writing about rock and roll, and then you end up being all the things that rock and roll still attacks.
Yeah.
But you see, it's what they've stayed in the same place. I've moved, but
You've
not
validated.
not in the way they think.
Yeah.
I've just moved in accordance with reality.
Mm.
Because, you know, who is it that said, you know, when the facts change, I change my position. What do you do, my boy? You know, I mean, that's what we have to do.
My favourite one at the moment is history would be great if only it were true.
Yeah.
History's written by the victors, you know.
Yeah, well, that's it. And so I kind of find now that I have slight dealings with all these people that I used to hang out with in the past, and they're all deeply embarrassed by me. And
because you're swimming against the flow. You're coming up with your
They
own
don't know what to say to me. And when they meet me, you know, they expect me to have grown horns or something, or to not use swear words or something like that, to have become want them to break into prayer every so. And I don't want to do any of that stuff. And I'm actually, in my view, in that sense, I'm not changed. I'm the same personality as I was, but I just have got to the point where the truth's in my way.
That you can't get past the truth. That's what we're all trying to seek. Is the truth, the unadulterated truth.
And I can't deal with bullshit anymore.
Yeah, and why should we? Should we?
So I don't have a choice. It's really, really just, that's it. I have to go on doing this every day. And some days I think, wouldn't it be great, like, if all this is sorted out, I could go back to being cool. You know, because I used to be very cool, but I'm not now, and that's too bad. I don't lose any sleep about it.
No.
But it kind of does, kind of in a certain sense, dismay me. You know, it's weird. I like because there's some part of you that thinks, oh, life's not supposed to be like this. It's kind of like the movie is supposed to end well. You know, there's supposed to be
happy ever after. The everything's all good, and I've done my bit.
Yeah.
But now you're faced with a new issue, and a new struggle.
You know, maybe I watched too many movies. Because I know that my great hero, Václav Havel, you know, he was one of the great heroes of our time, you know, the president of Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic. And I read a biography of his, Michael Zantowski wrote it. He was his press attaché for years. Great book. And here's this guy, you know, who was kind of an ambiguous figure for many people. Because, he was in effect, to the leftism of communism, he could only have been a right winger.
Right.
And he was asked, well, why are your politics? He says, my heart's on the left. And I agree with that too. I know exactly what he means. But he was then, when after the Velvet Revolution in '89 and the elections when he became president and re-elected in 1990, he was like feted by the rock stars of the world, like, you know, Mick Jagger and Paul Simon and all the Frank Zappa were all like Lou Reed. They were all hanging out there in the castle in Prague, you know. And I you know, I got that, and he knew all about Lennon. He used to talk about John Lennon. He thought the death of Lennon was the moment of the 20th century. That was when the century died. Beautiful. Like, he was a great writer, a great thinker. But you know what? He died on his own, in his own bed, in his holiday home in the country in the Czech Republic. And the only people he saw in the last week of his life were two nuns who came to give him his dinner. That just shows you.
Yeah.
You know,
you can go from the heights and you can go back down.
There's no movie.
There is no movie. Life is harsh. Life is real.
Yeah, there's no movie.
Life is in our face.
This is
every
real.
day.
This is real.
John, I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you very much for agreeing to that.
Pleasure.
And I hope we can progress the conversation further. I'd like to just to remind all our viewers and subscribers, please like the press the like button, please subscribe, press the little blue bell for the notification. If you can share this amongst your friends, and we can bring the conversation to a newer place, that'd be great. Us.